Hi, Bernard. So thank you so much for joining us today. Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about you and what it is that you do at TNG?
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. Delighted to have a little conversation. Um, what do I do at TNG? I look after our consulting solutions to a large extent. And that's really an evolution of what TNG is. We've been a business that have had a heartland of capability work, but more and more clients are saying, that's great, you're helping us with upskilling our organizations, but can you help us with specific problems? And we're starting to work much more upstream in organizations, run the strategy, run the solution that they need to have in place long before they even get to the customer interface of selling and negotiating that solution. And that sort of upstream element of our work is what is both exciting, I find it exciting anyway, and what clients are asking us to do. And that's a real repositioning of what we are and what we do at Total Negotiation Group.
Thank you. And what did you do before joining Total Negotiation Group?
I've had quite a long stint in consulting. I worked for Kantar Consulting, before that Kantar Retail, and also known as Glendinning. So it was a business that evolved for 15 years. A big chunk of that was in Asia, where I was managing partner for Kantar Consulting for 5 years based in Shanghai. But I still look fondly at the time that I was at the coalface doing, as I call it, the real job, but certainly within a major fast-moving consumer goods business, Procter & Gamble, quite a well-known organization. And I started my career with them in South Africa, and then also in the UK. So 9 years in total with Procter & Gamble before moving into consulting.
Wow. So you've done a bit of everything then, which is fantastic news for our clients. How have you honed your commercial skills and in particular your RGM skills?
Well, I think commercial skills to a large extent, there's a big element of experience in that. I certainly like to think that I've worked in multiple markets. I've probably done consulting work in over 60 different countries. I've lived in South Africa, UK, China, as I've mentioned. So those are a good combination of developing and developed markets. And what we start seeing there is a sort of trend lines and how commercially countries and the infrastructure in those countries move along. I guess problems aren't always new problems. They are the same problems, but in a different context and a different nuance. I think RGM as a practice is one of those jobs where you want to take out of the past that is good and build on that. So there's a lot of reflection. What has worked in the past? How do we refine that? Is a big part of what the role is about. Secondly, RGM practitioners need to be quite well financially minded, but also commercially minded. So how do they take financial modeling and put that into a practical sense? And I think that's where my particular skill lies, is helping our clients, taking some of their deep financial thinking, but making that real and commercially practical for their customers.
Fantastic. Now, we've got a lot of listeners who are perhaps just starting off in their career within the FMCG world amongst our clients. If you could give just one piece of RGM advice to them, what would it be?
Well, RGM is a real sort of connector in the business. It is a strategic type role. So anybody who moves into RGM need to think of that as that sort of strategic connection that they build in the organization. And that means that they need to build very good relationship, both upstream with marketing teams, thinking about innovation, new product launches, etc., that will be coming down the pipe, making sure that those are, from a revenue management perspective, sound, but then also working downstream into the sales teams, ensuring that those things can actually be executed in customers. So certainly thinking of yourself as a connector, as that strategic interface between what the brand design is and how that will be delivered in retail stores is a key skill that I think is missing in quite a few organizations. And anybody therefore stepping into RGM that can master that skill will be invaluable to their organization.
So it sounds like being a good communicator is key then.
Yeah, and indeed it is, and connectors in a business, thinking on a strategic level, but also on a practical level.
Sure. Now, there's been lots of changes in the industry and in the world in general over the last couple of years. What are you seeing? What trends are you seeing that are now the key stumbling blocks within RGM?
I still think capability is a big issue. So organizations have set up RGM functions. Quite often those are staffed with folk who are very well financially minded, but they've operated to some extent as in a silo. So those stumbling blocks, pretty much to my earlier point, is how does RGM as a function, as a unit within the business, embed itself as that strategic interface between the brand building and the go-to-market, the sales organization. And there's a lot more that they can be done. I'm a big and a passionate believer in multifunctional selling. So bringing all of that functional expertise that you have in the organization and making sure that that becomes part of your selling proposition to customers. And I don't think RGM is there yet, partly because they as a function don't necessarily understand what sales is, especially if they come from a finance background. But then equally, are the sales organization receptive to the RGM messages? So within the wider organization, RGM needs to be a bit more of the language, and everybody needs to have a baseline knowledge, a good working knowledge of what RGM is. The other area that we've seen a lot of sort of clients stumble is in the arena of tools and software, etc. So there's fantastic solutions out there. A lot of clients have acquired those, but they haven't really thought about how those tools and processes solve actual business problems. So there's software, and they might be trained on how to use the software, but when do you deploy it? What is the business problem that I'm actually trying to solve? And making that sort of connection. And that comes down to that idea of insight, which is if I know what the problem is I want to solve, it becomes easier to do that. And RGM has got to play that role. It's not just about how I solve the problem, but identifying what the problem is. And if RGM can play that role and do that in a cohesive way with the sales and marketing teams, they'll be even more valuable to their organizations.
Some great advice there. So the post-pandemic global recession is set to be probably the biggest the consumer goods industry has ever seen. All categories within consumer goods are going to be affected. And if inflation remains as high or even climbs even further, what would you say that the key things are that consumer brands will need to look out for in order to survive?
Yeah, that's a big question, but we can take out of the history and recent history to see how we answer that. So 2020 obviously moved into the global pandemic, and one of the things that happened in retail is a very fast pivot into e-commerce. And depending on exactly which market or country is in, you've seen within 9 weeks the same level of development that took the preceding 9 years. So rapid change into e-commerce, and a lot of organizations had to work very hard to make that transition and suddenly deal with the fact that e-commerce is now not just a 5% part of their business, something they can dabble and play with, but is now 25% of their business, and they really need to master it fast. We had a similar inflection point, and it is probably unusual that these sort of inflection points happen so closely together. But it is the fact that we've got a pandemic, supply chain crisis then has followed that. That's driven inflation. And then with a war in Eastern Europe, that's not helping the matter as well. So we suddenly have these two big inflection points following hot on each other. What we can learn from that e-commerce is the challenge for organizations to move fast. So you've got to get people into new roles, upskill them, change who they are. You cannot hire your way out of this problem. So you've got to use the resource that you have and give them new skills. So that's internally in an organization that's happening. Secondly, on the external landscape, we already know there's going to be certain behaviors that's going to change. E-commerce has plateaued, and actually for quite a few markets, we're seeing a decline in the penetration of e-commerce. But it is at a high level. It's still very important. But where are we going to see the new growth? Well, is this maybe the time for big box retail, hypermarkets, to suddenly become significantly more important? They've been in decline for a long period of time. Will there now be a change in that sense? Secondly, we are going to potentially see shoppers down trading, and will discounters play an even more significant role? For quite a few years, they've been tapping into markets becoming slightly more important. Will they now actually, in markets like the UK, take on even more significance versus traditional players? And then I think the other external factor that is quite important is starting to think about the cost of capital. So even when you talk about RGM, it is very much a P&L, income statement based activity. What we will see now is investment being constrained, and therefore balance sheet conversations becoming more important. And for most salespeople, but even commercial finance, that will be an unusual topic. So that sort of combination of balance sheet and P&L being particularly challenging. And again, that just points to the fact that salespeople will have to become familiar and comfortable with having GMROI conversations, gross margin, return on inventory investment with customers, even getting into topics like RONA or ROCE, so return on net assets or return on capital employed, as kind of really tough conversations that they may not have had in the past.
Lots to think about there. Thank you. And what are your key predictions for 2023 in the field of RGM?
So I think resource is going to be constrained. People will have to find new skills and master new skills, crucially. And then this idea of retailers being more demanding. And just to reflect on that, quite a lot of manufacturers have taken price increases, in some instances, multiple price increases. They've justified those with stories of category growth. And retailers aren't powerful and successful the way they've been because they don't have great practitioners within their business. And they're going to come back hard at manufacturers and say, you've taken those price increases, you've promised us growth, and now you need to deliver on that. So as part of that, I think organizations will serve themselves well if they do exceptional levels of account planning for 2023. It is simply a case that I think going into this planning season is one of the most critical they would have seen. Secondly, they need to make good on those promises of category growth. So category management and category skills are going to be absolutely vital. Do you have a great category strategy in place? And if you haven't, then you should get one and build those into account plans. And the manufacturers that aren't ready are the ones who are going to see a lot of the value that they've built through their cost price increases. It will erode away as retailers come back to have their piece of the pie. So for 2023, certainly my prediction, but advice would be get hot on account plans and make sure your category strategy is there, because de facto customers will expect it. And if you don't deliver on it, you're going to have a tough trading environment.
And is category strategy, that's something that we can help with at Total Negotiation Group?
Absolutely. We have done quite a bit of that. And quite a few of our clients are already asking us for that help. So we'll be able to also then pivot across different clients that we work with, extract best practice, and make sure that our clients can benefit from what we are seeing, not in their competitors, but in other categories, and reapply some of that knowledge.
Fantastic. And then quickly before we go, a couple of quick fire questions. Cricket or rugby?
Oh, that's a close run thing, but I have to say cricket. I just love the stats.
Okay. And you've lived and worked all over the world. If you could move somewhere tomorrow, where would you move to?
Cape Town, of course. That's where I was born. What could be better?
It's a beautiful place. I don't blame you. Thank you so much, Bernard. It's been fantastic having you on today's episode.
Thank you very much. Nice talking to you, Anna.
Thanks.